Good evening and welcome to our ninth meeting of fiscal year 2022. I'd like to call our meeting to order. In accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, people may participate via Zoom. And the idea and passcode are available on the planning board's agenda, which are found on the planning board page on the Town of Milton website. Citizens may also view our meetings on cable access, live streaming, or at a later date on the cable access website. So tonight is all about zoning. We have 2 hours, and our first focus is the proposed memory clinic on Highland Avenue. We're going to try to limit that discussion to 45 minutes. And then Kathleen O'Donnell will present her accessory dwelling unit bylaw. We'll also limit that to 45 minutes. And before I go much further, I wanted to give the board the opportunity to introduce themselves. Let's see, Kathleen O'Donnell.
Here.
Let's see, Rich Beeler.
Rich Beeler is secretary.
Thank you. Cheryl Tagayas.
Cheryl Tagayas, member.
Denise, let's see, Meredith Hall.
Meredith Hall, member.
And Denny Swenson, member and chair. So after we do those 2 topics, hopefully we'll keep them to around 45 minutes each. Whatever time we have left, we can discuss other zoning matters like a little update on the cut and fill bylaw, trees, what have you. But let's jump right into memory clinic.
Denny, can I do a little bit of table setting?
Thank you.
So just really quick. So I've been corresponding and communicating with the select board office, and they are targeting a February 28th special town meeting. And so I think one of the goals of tonight is to kind of figure out, given that timetable of closing the warrant sort of towards the end of November, if the board feels like that timetable is enough to get these 2 articles to a point where we can, credibly add them to the warrant and have a public hearing on them. Counting tonight, there's tonight and then 2 other meetings of the planning board in November. I personally think that we can get these articles in pretty good shape by that time. And then potentially schedule a public hearing for one of the earlier December meetings, which I think would put us in relatively good shape to get complete articles if the planning board decides to give complete articles to the warrant committee for their consideration in time for that town meeting at the end of February. So that's kind of the timetable we're kind of wrestling with right now. But I think the main thing is coming to a good sense of the board by the end of this meeting. Is this path going to work? And can we, do we think we can get this done, in the month of November?
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for setting the table. And I forgot to allow the staff to introduce themselves. So Tim.
Tim Zerwinski, Director of Planning Community Development.
Allison.
Allison Quinn, Assistant Director. Or no, I forget what I'm called. I'm sorry.
Allison is the Assistant Director of Planning and Community Development. She's still not used to it, but she should call herself that.
That's a lot.
I like to call her the Grand Poobah. Okay. And Julia.
Julia Getman, the lowly clerk.
Don't say that. Okay.
Denny,
All right. Yes.
Can I make a comment or request?
Yes.
You laid out 45 minutes, and oftentimes we've spent, when we're talking about this potential zoning, we've talked about site plan and particular design solutions. And I'd like to limit that part of our discussion so we can talk more about the zoning, because that's really what our focus is at this time, not a site plan or approval or a special permit. So, so that's my request.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for saying that, because that's kind of where I was going to. I wanted to have Mr. Corcoran and the Northbridge team have 5-ish minutes to give us a quick update, hear from the public, and then actually dive into just walking through the zoning language. So
Great,
it's
thank you.
it's 8 pages. And I just wanted to kind of walk through it and each of us provide comments. So at the end, that's the goal. At the end, we want to have that done. Okay. All right, Mr. Corcoran.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I want to thank you and Cheryl and Kathleen in particular for making it to the site walk on Saturday. I hope that you found that to be helpful. I did submit a minor update to the site plan that we had shown and walked the site with the other day. And the one change that we've shown on the site plan, and if you want me to share a screen, I can bring that up to you. So if you can see this, we've added a berm, a raised berm along the edge of the walkway and retaining wall. That raised berm would be 15 feet wide, 2 feet tall. It would be populated with 20-foot tall evergreens and infilled with other materials. The purpose of this is to demonstrate that we are thinking about how to mitigate and buffer the views, particularly from Ms. Bacardi's property next door. We certainly, there is more to do and certainly would expect to work more specifically on this relative to Ms. Bacardi's input. We look forward to working with her when they are ready, willing, and able to do that. Otherwise, the site plan is as we saw and we walked with the team. The other thing I did late this afternoon is I forwarded some floor plans, which I think are helpful. This is a 2-story section. First story is lowered into the ground. The second story is visible from above the ground. And this is a 1-story section. The total lot coverage is about 36,000 square feet. And the gross floor area is approximately 54 to 55,000 square feet. So I think those are 2 numbers that are helpful. And with that, you and I know spoke about potentially another site walk. We're happy to cooperate with that. We would do our best to tape the lower portion of the building so that you can see the complete area to be covered on the ground by this proposed building. But I do agree with Cheryl that I think it would be helpful to launch into the language, and we're ready, willing, and able to do that. What I would say about the language is, with some exceptions to some minor, for maybe some additional tweaks, we think we've listened. We think we've proposed language that gets us as far as we can to protecting and respecting the interests of the abutters and others. It is a constrained site. The site has 2 intermittent streams that flow through it. We have wetland considerations that we have to pay attention to. And so the area of upland that's available that remains for development is constrained. And to develop a project of this scale, we need to we're pulling as far as we can away from lot lines, but we don't have a lot of room to maneuver. And so we really appreciate everybody's focus and attention, and we look forward to, obviously tonight, sharing our thoughts or additional thoughts and listening to comments and questions about the specific language. The last thing I would say is that I submitted an updated red line version and specifically called out the new language that I had addressed in that from the last iteration that we looked at a couple of weeks ago. And so I've identified, I think, specifically each change that we heard and were able to respond to in the course of reviewing the language. So thank you, and let's get on with the business.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Corcoran. Before I forget, let's schedule our next public site walk dates that work for me and happen to work for Ned Corcoran, Sunday, November 14th. I just wanted to see if Rich or Meredith uh, would Sunday, November 14th work, or would you prefer a weekday? We could
That
do
works.
Thursday. They work? Okay, what about you, Rich? Sunday, November 14th?
It just depends.
Oh.
Sundays are tough for me. I have sports.
Okay,
So I don't know.
okay, all right. Another option, we could schedule for November 14th, and then we could find another time for you.
Yeah,
If that works, I could work on that with you.
yeah. I mean,
and,
we can play it by ear for now. I mean, that's far enough
Okay.
out.
And in
Yeah,
in that regard, Danny, I'm flexible. I'm available. My office is right in Milton, so I can, on a moment's notice, shoot over and do a site walk. So if that's something that, if Rich wants to find a couple of times and suggest, I'm happy to meet with him and walk the site with him. And obviously you and others could join as well, but I'm happy to be available to do that.
Okay, great. And Cheryl, Kathleen, I know you've already been on the site a couple times, so does the 14th work for you if you want to get there, or would you want to?
I don't, I've already walked the site twice, so I really don't see.
That's fine. You've done your job.
It was a swamp the first time and it was a rainy mess the second, so I suppose I could wait for a nicer day, but I'm good.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad you're good. And Cheryl, you're welcome on the 14th, but no pressure.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
okay. Okay. All right. So Ned, you got Meredith and I on the 14th, possibly Rich. We'll work something out later. Thank you.
And
10
any
a.m. work?
particular time?
10 a.m. Meredith?
Could we do it a little bit later?
Yeah. What time?
Noon would be great, actually.
Okay. All right. Noon it is.
And if we're the only ones, I'm pretty flexible too, like Ned is,
Okay.
and work from home. So if we have time with Rich, I'm happy to, if Rich has a few times, we can offline maybe.
I was hoping to get it out so the public could join too.
Okay.
So
Yep.
I think it's nice if we tell the public Sunday, November 14th at noon, because some of them couldn't make it because of the rain. So thank you. All right. So would love to hear from the public if people want to raise their hand. Because we're trying to get a lot done tonight, we're going to try to limit comments to 3 minutes. But yes.
I'm sorry. Maybe what we should do before we ask for comment, because maybe some people haven't been following this, would be just to give a brief overview of what the zoning would allow, and before soliciting those comments.
Okay. All right. I'll do a quick overview. And if you wanted to join me for 3 minutes and describe the zoning, can we do teamwork? Is that good?
Sure.
Okay. So here's my quick overview. So I want to say early-ish June, roughly, we started to welcome the Northbridge Milton Hospital Ned Corcoran team into our planning board meetings. They have come to us 8 times. They've been welcomed, and I think they've taken every opportunity. The public came to those meetings as well. So we've had a lot of discussions about this over the summer and through the fall up to now. The Milton Hospital Northbridge team has also been meeting with the neighborhood and the public on its own. They've had many meetings with the Conservation Commission. The Select Board has encouraged a winter town meeting for this article. And many of us attended the Conservation Commission site walk last summer. And there was a really good turnout from the planning board and the community in the rain this past Saturday for a planning board site walk. So Ned has agreed to flag the rest of the building's footprint with taped markers for our next site walk. We'll be able to identify the parking and driving areas, as well as he'll be able to point to the construction management, materials and equipment storage and access areas. So that will be on our next site walk. And tonight we want to talk about the zoning language. So take it away, Cheryl.
Okay, thanks, Denny. We currently in the zoning bylaws have a section called Special Permit 13, Assisted Living Residence Development, or ALRD. And for those who want to look it up, it's section 3, subsection P. And that language was adopted by town meeting some years ago when there was an opportunity for an assisted living facility on Randolph Avenue. That didn't come to fruition, but the zoning has remained on the books. The challenge with that zoning was it had language that restricted it to pretty much the site that was anticipated to be developed at that time. So we have an opportunity with the property on Highland Avenue to revise our zoning such that it would apply to the site that the hospital has on Highland. So in looking at that language, there are some provisions that would need to be revised based on the location, but there are other provisions that we've talked about that we've learned over the years with our zoning that we would want to include in this kind of zoning revision as well. So that would be like the kinds of materials we expect when they're submitted, you know, taking a hard look at setbacks and height requirements and lot coverage and so forth. So I just wanted to be clear that the language already exists and we're looking at revising it so that it could be something which an application in this property could fall under. And we're looking very carefully at the language itself. We're not looking at a project tonight. We're not looking at a special permit or a site plan approval. We're looking at zoning that would allow for that to come in the future, zoning revisions that would allow that to come in the future. Okay, so that's my 3 minutes, I hope.
Oh, yep, that was fun. Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are interested to hear from the public at this time. If anyone would like to speak to this memory clinic on Highland Avenue, potential winter zoning article, and I'm not seeing, oh, Mr. Henry. Okay. Can we invite Mr. Henry into the panel?
I think I'm in already. So I think
Okay, there you are.
everyone's up tonight for some reason. We're not kept out, so.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a free for all. Good evening. How are you tonight?
Doing
Before
very well,
Mr.
thank you.
Henry, sorry, Denny, the chair, before Mr. Henry starts, I just need to disclose the fact that we are both members of the Abstract Club, an organization of real estate lawyers in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's 125 years old and it has 100 members.
And Kathleen is the president, so I have to be very nice to her during. So,
Yeah, we cut off your oyster supply, right? Yeah.
I actually sent a letter before the meeting today that went through a number of points I wanted to raise about the draft that's here. I like the Ned and his team did a very nice job of addressing the points they could address. They added in, we'd asked for the frontage to be 400 feet. We asked for there to be language that it was next to a residence D1 district, so it couldn't be built all over Milton, which I think was the planning director's take in his memorandum. And he also added language about the excess land being put in conservation restrictions. The things that couldn't be addressed potentially because of the site constraints, which is the biggest concern we have, are the setbacks from the property line. We think that, and they've done a nice job with what they have as far as putting a berm in and trees, but we think 50 feet away from a property line in a residence district is too close for a project this size. And so we'd like to see that number be higher and have a no disturb zone with a higher number also. And so that's the main point we'd make in my summary. I also think that you may want to have the lot size be bigger than 150,000 square feet, because I think that there are other residential properties that abut this site that could fall into this definition. I don't think you want those to be subject to this also. And finally, I think some of the neighbors have raised the point about making sure that the fire access to the site and ADA compliance with sidewalks, et cetera, were built into the design. And that's something we'd like to see included in the zoning also. There's a little more detail in the letter I submitted, but those are the high points that we'd like to see, and we can come back to that as we go through the actual amendment. That's it
Okay.
for me now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Henry. So did you want to bring those items up as we got to the part in the zoning? I think that might be ideal.
Yeah, I think just as we go through, if we're going to go through the actual text and let the public make comments as you go through, as well as I'm sure Ned will have some comments, I think that would be the right time to bring these up specifically.
Okay. Okay, that's great. All right, thank you so much. We will be hearing from you in a little while then.
Honey, can I make a request that we
Yes.
have the site plan dropped and we bring the zoning up on the screen share, which I can bring up, or if Tim wants.
I can do that.
Sure.
I can do that right now if you'd like.
Yes, please do. Thank you. All right. I see Mr. Fioravante, please forgive me, or Ms. Alexandra. Alexandra?
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Oh, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
Could
you.
you tell us your name and street number?
Yes, so my name is Alex Fioravanti. I live at 138 Highland Street. And I'm here with Teresa O'Brien, who lives on 42 Spafford Street. We're going to be reading a letter that Ella Wells, who's another neighbor on Highland Street, she's unable to be on the meeting tonight, but she wanted us to share this letter. There's three main concerns that she's addressed. First is the issue of the fire engine accessibility that needs to be settled with a formal swept path analysis being performed. This cannot be overruled by any local or state fire ruling, and it will show that as currently planned, the 21-foot wide Highland Street and the 32-foot entrance to North Bridge Driveway will not provide a proper access by a fire engine to the memory clinic. Second, the lack of any sidewalks being planned for the memory entrance will be a clear violation of ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, which applies to any of the large facilities such as this with 70 residences and over 30 employees. If there is a fire inside the facility, then how would 100 people escape with the smoke and the fire and the driveway being blocked with the fire engine and cars and no sidewalks? Third, the Fire Chief Madden has informed us that there were 2 oil tanks that were located at the demolished building at 107 Highland Street, but there's no official record of those tanks ever being removed. Further, Lieutenant Matoliano, I'm sorry if I butchered his name, also noticed that the cement was poured over subsequent to the building demolition, and no explanation was ever provided for the reason for the new cement. Fire Chief Madden says his department has no way of testing the soil for oil. For these reasons, we repeat our request that the soil next to the cement pile and leading to the vernal pool be tested for potential oil spill, which the hospital has refused to do on several occasions. From Ella Wells.
Okay, well, thank you so much for bringing those questions forward.
Thank you so much.
Okay, unfortunately, I don't have answers for you. But I think I want to work with our town planning staff to try to get you some answers on those issues about the oil tanks. I think we probably can add ADA to the zoning. And I think Mr. Henry may be able to suggest where. I have some ideas of where. So that will be coming up further in our discussion. And then as far as street width, Cheryl, I recall last summer you did ask for a swept path analysis. Do you remember where that discussion went?
Denny, I would say that if we think about site plan approval and special permit versus zoning, that would be where I think that would fall, rather than, if we think about our zoning provisions elsewhere, all of our other sections and bylaws, it's not covered in those. So it's really in the rules and regs and in our jurisdiction when we do the special permit process. And, I do think it's a fair question to ask at that time. But, like, for example, this zoning was passed without that requirement for the, thinking of a different location. And I think the, anticipation at that time, what I anticipate would be what I just said, which is that it would be reviewed at the special permit stage.
I would agree with that. As I once again said, this is the zoning, not the application for the project. And those questions raised by Ms. Wells are excellent ones. I'm not saying that they aren't, but they would be more appropriate for the project application, not for the zoning, which we would hope, as you know, I've been banging this drum for forever and not with any result, is that I don't like zoning that's designed for one parcel. And so in the thought that there's remotely some other place in Milton where this could possibly apply, you wouldn't necessarily be putting those kinds of concerns in the zoning. They would be in the application for the project itself.
As far as the sidewalks, I think sidewalks, it's an interesting question because the rules and regs, the planning board and we've talked about sidewalks and we've talked about complete streets a lot, where this drive does come in quite a bit. And if you did have any staff who came by public transit, let's say bus on Reedsdale up to the hospital property. So I think, again, whether that's something in the zoning or something in the special permit, we could definitely handle it in the special permit. We have it in our rules and regs, and we could look at our rules and regs. They don't require revision at town meeting, but they would just require revision of the planning board. And I think it's something we've been talking about quite a bit anyway, the sidewalks and our rules and regs.
All right. And I know it's hard because I grapple with this too. There's a bit of a balance where the citizens would probably be wondering, well, if the fire truck can't go in, why are we going through with the zoning? So it's a tough situation, but I will talk to the town planner about that. And I would think about that when we get to the special permit part of our zoning. Maybe we could talk further about those two topics, and then the oil tank is going to.
That just makes me think of something. When we look at you're right. When we look at what the requirements are for the submission, we could add that to the requirement that be submitted as part of the requirement or a part of the application.
Right. That's what I was thinking. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So to be continued. Excellent questions, and we will get to them, and I will follow back up with you on that oil, because that is that's something that's come up before. I think we need to try to have a better response to the public on that. Okay.
So Denny, I think it could be helpful if one person kind of looks at each of these sections and review it. And it could be Tim, it could be me, it could be you, it could be Ned if you wanted to go that route. But I think it's kind of help guide the discussion as we go through each section. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. I mean, I even thought we could just jump into like the first section, and then we would each talk about ideas, any comments we had. But before we do that, I wanted to see if there were any other questions or comments or thoughts from the citizens about the memory clinic on Highland Avenue. And okay. All right. Well, Cheryl, did you want to lead the way a little bit? I was just hoping we could kind of talk a little bit about a section.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll just explain that the red is the revision that's proposed. The black is the existing bylaw, right? So here, this lays out that the lot for which a development could be of this sort could be proposed has to have frontage of at least 400 feet. And that is what I understand to be the full length of the property in question here. Not a portion of it, but now includes the entire portion. And then the next provision, B, ties it to having a senior housing development next to it, a residence D1. I know there may be some question about whether that's too specific and makes it considered to be spot zoning.
I
And
consider it to be too specific.
Okay, do you want to explain that a little bit,
Personally.
Kathleen?
Well, because we don't have very many residence D1 districts. I mean, don't we only have like 2? And so, as I said, my concern is that we tailor the zoning so specifically to a site that it runs the risk of being determined to be spot zoning. And while I appreciate the idea that, we'd like to protect the entire town from memory care units being popping up all over the place, I think that's not likely. And I would prefer to have, we have enough other provisions in here that tie it to this site that I would prefer to take that particular requirement out. But I realize I may be the only person who feels that way.
So can I ask a question, if your opinion, Kathleen, if this passed a town meeting with this provision in it, do you think it would run into trouble at its next stop, which would be the Attorney General's office?
I think it's possible that the AG's office wouldn't approve it. We could always ask town council to weigh in on it.
I could ask town council just to check the box.
I think I agree with Kathleen, though, that it's not necessary. There's enough other provisions in this that.
So let's go back, let's flag that as something to come back to, if you, Denny, so we can get through the whole thing.
Yep, keep going. Yep.
Okay, and then the next question, which is the size of the property, 150,000 square feet. Let's flag that too. Mr. Henry asked us to think about that.
I would
So
just point out that that's not the size of the property. That's the minimum square footage for the area that's buildable. And that buildable area is defined as area that is not wetland. It is not 25-foot buffer from wetland and not 100-foot buffer from a vernal pool. So that it is essentially upland, not the entire property.
And that's described here in black already
That's right.
in this language, right? Okay.
And that was in the existing bylaw.
That's in the
Yes.
existing.
What is the total lot size? Just to,
The total lot size is about 10 acres.
Okay, so Ned, since you have your screen shared, can you scroll a little bit?
Sure.
So I think there on the second paragraph, it describes what assisted living is. I think, memory care falls under assisted living, although assisted living itself doesn't only require memory care. So it's a kind of assisted living facility. So where you can see here where residents require assistance with day-to-day living. So we don't have to go into that further because that's already something that's there. And then you can scroll a little further, Ned.
Could I make one point about the definition of assisted living? Is that the part of the what the neighborhood has been told is that this won't have a lot of traffic because it's a memory care unit and people don't drive. The only traffic will be the staff. The way this is drafted now, it could be an assisted living facility with a lot of traffic. So it broadens the use and the potential traffic, which I don't think is necessarily the intent of the developers. I think their intent is to have a unit that doesn't have traffic. So we may want to consider whether that definition of assisted living is too broad and it should be changed to focus on memory care, which has less of an impact on traffic and other issues.
Yeah, but Doug, come on, that is so site specific. That's ridiculous. You know that. I mean, we can't be saying, oh, we can only have a memory care unit there.
Come on. Okay, Kathleen, we just want to keep the temperature down. I'm glad you're laughing. But I think we would just want to keep an open discourse. So
I think we
Yeah.
want to be careful. We can make a note of it, I think, to come back to. But I want to, again, remind us that we want to be careful that we have zoning that is not such that it wouldn't pass muster with the Attorney General. And, you know, the idea of zoning is not to zone for one particular project, generally speaking, my understanding. So I think, again, this is something, just considering how much time we've allocated, I just want to make sure we can cover all of it. So just, we can pin this as something to come back to, okay? All right, next on the units. So this sets how many units or how many residents can live in one of these facilities. And it's set at 70 units. We have talked about that this particular operator has a small number of semi-private units. So the number of residents would actually be a little higher than 70. This sets the size of the building also, because it was mentioned that you know, we don't have in this zoning lot coverage or floor area ratio, which normally are other tools to set the size of the building. So I would just like to make a note at this particular point that we should consider lot coverage and floor area ratio provisions, adding those to it. And that would be more specific to set the size of the building.
Okay, before we venture too far from units, I did have a question where Mr. Henry has raised some good points about the setbacks. I was wondering if Northbridge had given any thought to possibly having less units in order to have a smaller footprint, so there could be a better setback in that area.
No, Denny, specifically, this is the smallest size building that works from an economic and other perspective. 70 units is the smallest that they can do.
Have you looked at possibly a different shape, like an L shape or something along those lines? It seemed like Needham had a little bit of a different shape and maybe a lower unit count. I couldn't tell, you know, from outside.
I think Needham has the same unit count. It's a different shape. The lot itself is differently laid out and differently configured. We've looked at a dozen different layouts to try and find one that is as least impactful as possible. And we're chasing grades of the property. So this is the minimum size building. It's the minimum setbacks that we need to live with. And we just can't move on those issues. And I understand the request. I understand the concern. It's just we have no flexibility in that.
Have you given any consideration to maybe clustering it and possibly maybe going up a floor on the other side, that side that's furthest away from the Bacardi property? Maybe going up to 3 stories there, and I don't know, I could be opening a can of worms because the community might not like that idea, but I'm just trying to.
And it's only 1 story on the one wing is only 1 story. And it's the issue that I raised a long time ago, which is that they have a 2-story building in the highest topographic area. So they're cutting in to do the 2-story building to make it lower in height. And they're putting the 1-story part of the building basically at grade. And part of that is because of the way they access these courtyards on a 2-story building, that I've come to understand, is that when you have to be able to, it's desirable to have the residents be able to go from their neighborhood, if you will, the 3 different neighborhoods, directly outside, or I'm not sure if it's 3 neighborhoods, but directly to the outdoor space. So I do think
there are each neighborhood has direct access to secure outside area. And it has to be on the same floor level as the level of the neighborhood itself. So there's just no way to build a third story because the third story wouldn't have access to an outdoor living area.
So, but and I too, I asked for the floor plans because I wanted to look at the floor plans and I wanted to look at the site plan. And, you know, I really do think that with some more design efforts, that setback could possibly, a greater setback could possibly be achieved. So I do want to talk about setback a little bit more when we get to it. But that it wouldn't change the way the floors are and necessarily, and it wouldn't necessarily change the number of units to do that.
All right, well, I do look forward to trying to make this better because, you know, any way we can make it better. But for now, on the unit count section, we had language earlier, or there was a suggestion made that we would add and no more than 76 residents. Because I understand some of the units might have a couple in them or more than one resident in a unit. But I thought that was a good addition that somebody had suggested, so I wanted to add that back in.
So the other way we can handle it, if we don't want to tie it down to number of residents, is a percentage of units that could be semi-private. So, I mean,
Okay.
if we said that would be what, like, if it's 6 that you're talking about?
Yeah,
no
it'd be
more
like
than
10%.
10%, yeah.
Okay, I would be willing to do either of those.
I'll need to confer with our side and what that maximum number of units of
Okay.
semi-privates would be, but we'd certainly work with you on that.
Okay,
I mean, I think that it's a good point because, you know, if all of these at some point became semi-privates, you can be looking at 140 instead of 76, you know?
I agree.
And that's a big difference in
Right.
staffing and in
Understood.
impact and height and so forth, right? So I
Understood.
agree with that.
thank you. Good, we're making improvements, so that's always good. Okay, I'm ready to move on.
Yep, okay. So we took out language, if you, just in case people wanted to look at that, because this, it didn't seem to apply here to require certain things when this is required elsewhere in this kind of a building type. It doesn't really belong in the zoning. So I don't know if there's any question about that. Okay.
Tim Truinsky has his hand up. I don't know if he intentionally has his hand up, but if Tim wanted to jump in, please feel welcome, Tim.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I've got the deputy town planner is not happy right now, so I gotta.
Oh, okay, you can come back later.
Well, no. What I wanted to say, and it was related to something that Doug Henry was saying earlier, about the use, and I think it stems from the fact that this is kind of amended zoning that already exists for an assisted living project. And one thing that I think the board and the applicant need to kind of keep in mind is, this zoning exists and it is applicable to certain sites in town. And the planning board needs to be deliberate in its thinking about whether or not the changes that we're making are going to take other sites out of eligibility to use this zoning. That may be something that is not, that's fine and we want to do it. But I want to make sure everyone's clear about that, changes that we make now may make other projects unavailable to use this zoning.
Oh, okay, so the one at Randolph Avenue, if we changed the name to memory care, that would have to become memory care and not just assisted living? Or,
Yeah, and you know what, there's still a lack of assisted living, true assisted living, because we have a lot of over 55 living, but it's not assisted living. So I think it's a really good point Tim makes that, there still is demand for the assisted living, which is in
Okay.
between independent elder living and memory care.
One
So-
approach to think about would be to name this not as an amendment to the former, but to make it a new provision that would allow memory care
Oh, interesting. Because I do think Mr. Henry had a really good point. But as far as the public is concerned, they have been thinking memory care this whole time. And then it's an assisted living article. So I can totally understand why the public would be wondering about that. So Ned's idea is very interesting.
I was sort of noodling that in the last couple of days, just thinking about that as well.
So it would be a brand new article.
It would just be a new section of the bylaw. You would retain this special section 13. It would become special section, 20, whatever the next one up is.
Okay.
I think that's what I had proposed in one original draft, that it was just a brand new article, not
Yeah.
reviving this one,
I see. Okay. All right. Points to ponder. We could keep our little list. So we keep the movement going, if that's okay. Cheryl.
I see a couple of hands up. Danny, I don't know if you wanted to see if there was.
Oh,
any
okay.
comment on that. Tim's still up, and then I see Janet Irwin.
Okay. Tim, did you want to add anything, or can we hear from Ms. Irwin? Okay, he's probably busy with the deputy. Oh,
Yeah.
Tim. Hello, Tim.
No, he put
Are
his
you all
hand down, I think.
Oh, okay. I hope somebody's going to bed. Ms. Irwin, you can.
Hi, can
Hello?
you hear me?
Oh, yes, it's Mr. Irwin. Hello.
Yes. I'm sorry. Gene Irwin, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9, 120 Highland Street. While you're talking about setbacks, I think the public might be a little bit confused, like I am, as to, okay, the frontage is on Highland Street. So I would consider the rear of the property the border with Winter Valley. However, this building is sort of sideways on the lot. So the backyard is really towards the Bacardi house. And when you're talking about setbacks, and you're talking about rear lot lines, to me, the Bacardi residence is really the rear lot line in this proposal. And I just think going forward on any property down the road, to me, the memory clinic's backyard is really the side of the property. And so I just think it's hard to put setbacks on rear lot lines when the rear of the property faces the side lot line. And that's all I just wanted to bring up. Because side setbacks tend to be very narrow, but in this case, it's really a rear setback because the property is situated sideways on the lot. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, interesting point. Thank you, Mr. Irwin.
Ned, can you scroll up a little bit now that we're on the setbacks and we can see what's in here? Thank
I
you.
defer to Kathleen, but I think front yard, side yard, that's a technical term for zoning. The frontage is defined by frontage on a street. The rear is the lot line that's opposite the frontage, and the sides of the other two that are perpendicular.
Okay. All right. So Mr. Irwin, I guess it's a legal definition as opposed to, the way you might feel on a given property. It's actually a legal.
Yeah, so the thing that we deal with, and sometimes I think in a larger building footprint, is that if you think about the impact of a building, the bigger breadth it is, so the footprint, and the taller it is, usually the further away from the property line, whether it's front, back, rear, side, so that its impact is reduced the further away from the property line it gets. So there's two things that play in this zoning: the height of not exceeding 25 feet, combined with the distance from the property line, are what those in combination are trying to work together. So instead of 35 feet, which is what's allowed in our single family zoning everywhere across town, and 10 or 15 or 20 feet, you drop it down and you allow it a little bit closer, you're mitigating the impact. That's the way these tools work. So we can talk about whether we think 25 and 50 are the right numbers, but I just wanted to point out their interrelationship.
The other thing
Okay.
I would point out is that, in the D1 zoning amendment that we went through for Winter Valley, we approved a 45-foot tall height with a 40-foot side yard setback. That was the setback closest to the abutters on the Mergewood Road. And so you have 45 feet and 40 feet. In this case, we're at 25 feet from grade and we're at 50 feet in setback.
Okay, I noticed we have, I don't know if Mr. Irwin, did you get your question answered? Are you all set?
Well, yes and no. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Again, Winter Valley, that building that's going up there, it's a little bit different circumstance because there's already an L-shaped piece to the memory clinic property that shelters the neighbor. There's about 100-foot buffer that really can't be built on in any way. So I just think we should be careful. If
There are
you turn a
three,
building sideways-
there are three single-family residents who directly abut the Winter Valley property in the rear.
Can I just bring up
toward the Highland Street side?
On the Mergewood Road side.
Yeah, Mergewood Road. It's true. And those
Okay.
neighbors spoke at the time that we amended that zoning.
All right.
But I
well,
just think on a building this size going forward, we have to have some provision because really what's facing the Bacardis is the rear of the building. And you can defeat the zoning sort of just by turning the building sideways is my point.
Okay, point taken. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Irwin.
thank you.
Thank you so much. And Alexandra?
Yes.
Hello.
Thank you. Actually, this is Teresa O'Brien.
Oh,
Um,
hello, Teresa.
So my concern is the building. I bought my house 9 years ago. It was zoned residential. I was really hoping 3 or 4 nice houses would go up across the street or even 10, a nice development. So to see memory care, my mom passed away of Alzheimer's. I took care of her at home for 4 years. So I understand every aspect of memory care. So I definitely do think they should have sidewalks because I do know that at some point, some of them will be in wheelchairs. So I do have, I feel bad for that. But as owning a house right here, the traffic is absolutely insane. I live in the corner of Spafford and Highland, and I drive my kids to Pierce, and I can't even take Highland to drive them to Pierce because it gets backed up at the hospital. I walk my dogs every morning. I go by the hospital where it's the sidewalk, and half the time cars don't even stop driving into the hospital. They don't even realize there's a sidewalk there. And half the time it's like they're just zooming in as if they own the road. So there's already so much traffic from the hospital that just to add in memory care into, honestly, my father was in a nursing home. People visit. And shame on you if you don't visit your parents. People visit. So to say that parking, no, people visit. And they're saying this is from Milton. So you know what? If it's from Milton residents, I hope their friends and family are coming. I took care of both my parents. My dad lived with me on Spafford Road for 3 years. So it's heartbreaking that we're saying, oh, no, they don't need parking because no one visits them. They do visit. They will visit. So it will be traffic. And Spafford Road does not have any sidewalks. So I don't want these people coming up and down while they visit or while they go to work. I bought my house. I looked into zoning. I was concerned because at the time, everyone was saying that Milton Hospital needed more parking. I was concerned across the street was going to become a parking lot. And people assured me, well, it's zoned for residential. It's not going to become a parking lot. So it's just, I'm okay. I'd rather see it be memory care than assisted living. But it's at the end of the day, there's just so much traffic. And then we're sitting here talking about Winter Valley. And then the building beside Winter Valley, which I know has nothing to do with it, but that's a whole nother 40B with maybe 50 units. The traffic is ridiculous.
Over 100.
To drive my kids to baseball
Nice if we
to
could
the
get
high
50.
school is insane.
Yeah, I know. Ms. O'Brien, do you mind giving your address? I meant to ask for that when you first joined us.
It's 42 Spafford Road.
Oh, good. Thank you. Our
Thank
clerk
you.
thanks
Thank you for listening. Thank you.
No,
for listening
thank
to
you
me
so
complain.
much. And points well taken. Your experience, you see a need for sidewalks, concerns about parking, traffic. And when you bought your house, you were zoned residential, as was
It was
across
zone
the street.
residential across the
Yeah.
street. They, I looked at it and, shame a make because Zero Highland didn't show up. I knew about 107 and 111. So I just honestly didn't, I thought the lot across from me, because it's Zero Highland, I thought it was wetlands. I didn't
Mhm.
do enough research to realize, well, no, that's actually Zero Highland and that's owned by the
Wow.
hospital.
Well, no shame on you. I mean, you move in, you do your due diligence, you checked your zoning. It's nobody's
So
fault.
There was
So
a
just
house across
something-
the street that needed to be knocked down for a while, and I kept saying, who owns it? And they said, it's the hospital. So I did try to look up zoning and figured it would just be another house.
So something I will just throw out there is that the master plan suggested that the town consider healthcare overlay. Like the hospital itself, doesn't fall under any kind of healthcare zoning. And if there was something where, working with the hospital in terms of how access is done to their property from both Reedsdale and Highland Ave, could be part of something where you're talking about like an institutional master plan like Boston does. And so that could be something to work with them. I don't know what the usage coming off of both streets is for both, but the point about whether the hospital can manage access to their property is something that I think is a valid point for consideration for neighbors. But
The
not in
hospital,
that particular
the
zoning.
hospital is a use that's
So-
allowed as an
so-
institutional use by special permit.
Sorry
It's
to
not-
interrupt, but I'm very concerned. We're not getting far on this zoning language and we're already at 8 o'clock.
So here, Denny, if I may, I mentioned that the height, right? So it's suggested here that the height be not exceed 2 stories. Our single family allows 2.5 stories, so just people can get it. And then the other thing is that I mentioned the 25 feet, and that's to the grade, existing grade. So if anything is that they need to do 2 stories, they have to excavate into the soil. Now, normally when we're talking about cut and fill, that might be something of concern to me, but in this particular case, when we're talking about the proximity of the setback, and the particular one individual abutter, then having this provision addresses that concern that I mentioned before. And so it's that only allowing that 1.5 story be visible at that point, because it is closer setback. So does everybody understand that on our board?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so then you go to the next paragraph talks about the actual setbacks of being 150 from the street, 50 from the side, and 100 from the rear. One thing that we've talked about in the past, when we say 50 feet, we've talked about like the current plan. Previously, there was a plan that had a roadway, and I think we want to be specific. Normally, a setback is for a building. We could talk about whether that setback within that, what can happen within that 50-foot setback in terms of retaining walls or in terms of roadways, in terms of like removal of trees, like kind of a do not. So all of those things can help make that 50-foot. All of these things combined, I think, are trying to address the distance and the buffer and the impact to that one particular neighbor.
I had one question about the 25-foot. In my letter today, I noted that one of the original iterations of the zoning back in June or July had that as no more than 20 feet closest to us. And the question I have is, why was that raised 25? Is that a function of moving it further back, or is it a design function? Because we originally had 20 feet height not to exceed at the closest to the residential property.
I'm not sure I'm able to answer that. What I know is that the building needs, that the peak of the roof is 25 feet from the grade, above the grade, at the point where it's located now. And
So maybe one thing that we've talked about, especially when we were talking about Winter Valley, was you could, some zoning codes define a height to a midpoint of a slope and to the top of the structure of a flat roof. So it could be that 25 feet is not exceed 25 feet at the ridge. And you can make it less than that if it's not a ridge that's at that distance away.
And I don't remember whether that was in my draft or in Ned's, so it's hard to say what that, what provisions you were looking at.
I think that was Ned's redraft initially, because there was a concern after one of the neighborhood meetings about height closest.
Uh-huh.
But that was my recollection, looking back today.
I don't have a recollection of ever putting 20 feet in the draft, but obviously I can check that as well.
That would be good. Thank you so
We were al-
much.
We were always focused on 35 feet from the finished grade.
Okay, well, if we could just get an answer for him, but we can do that
Sure.
offline. I just thought we should limit the number of accessory buildings. I would love to limit the number of them and possibly the size of the footprint or something. I went and I looked at other Northbridge memory clinics. I think I went to 7 of them, believe it or not. And I didn't really notice many sheds or accessory units. So I'm not really afraid of Northbridge putting a bunch of these in, but I think it's always good to put a limit on those. And then possibly a limit of the location, like somewhere within the building area.
Yeah, I think that an accessory building, we should try and get that more than 50 feet away from the side lot line.
Yeah. Okay,
So
we can work on that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm just concerned about this because we have people here who are here for the next topic. So.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, keep going. Okay, so open space. I was looking at the part where it says driveways and sidewalks may be cited to pass through this area as necessary. Earlier, in an earlier version, I thought Cheryl made a good point, and she didn't want the driveways to go through the open space. Do you recall this at all, Cheryl?
I do, yes. And
I
it was
agree with
really
you.
thinking about that area next to the side yard, the Bacardi, because the side yard could easily get eaten up, with roadway and things. So, one other way to handle it is instead of having it in the open space here, depending upon how this is, we define this. I think here it says open space is going to be left in its natural state or landscape in accordance with an approved landscape plan. But I still think a drive shouldn't be considered to be allowed to be in the open space.
Well, just let's think about the fundamental of that. This is saying that all the way around the property, you'll have minimum of 20 feet. You still have to access the property. So you have a driveway that's going to cut through it. Right,
Yeah,
the main
you have
access
to.
drive has to be allowed to cut through it.
Well, I guess.
Otherwise, you can't access the property, or you
Right.
can define the open space as being exclusive of the access drive.
That's better, I think.
We can modify it that way, but we do need an access drive.
Of course. Okay, let's do that
Of course.
exclusive drive language. Okay. All right.
Okay, and let's see. I mentioned adding FAR lot coverage, which I can look at. Ned can look at as well between now and our next meeting. And then the next point I think here was Mr. Henry had suggested, and it looks like it's been added, which is the possibility of putting a conservation restriction in, which I think is a good addition to the zoning.
Okay,
I
I
agree.
think that would be good. Yeah, that would be excellent. Is that something you can take a stab at, Ned?
Well, I put this language in. I'm not sure we need to do more.
Where is it?
My concern with the language was that it said it may be placed. I think the board should have the right to require it as part of the lease requirement.
Well, I said, is it determined to be appropriate by the planning board? If the planning board determines to be appropriate, then it gets placed into conservation restriction. Or is otherwise restricted by the permit.
I think Kathleen, did you have comment about that? Because it can be put into the zoning, but can it be made a requirement of the zoning?
No, you really can't, because it's, you know, people can offer it, but you're not really supposed to be requiring it. Because that's a taking.
So that can be done it can be done though during the special permit process? in your
Absolutely,
view?
absolutely. But sort of requiring it in the zoning is a problem, because as I said, it's essentially a taking of economic value without compensation. So, I mean, cluster zoning allows for it, but that's a different thing, because you're getting, relief from the subdivision control law by, by doing a cluster zoning, so you can require it there. But I'm involved in a case right now where there's a challenge to that side of requirement, because they're saying it's an uncompensated taking. So, as I said, that's something that the applicant can offer as a lollipop in the application hearing, but I don't think we can require it in the zoning.
Not even a lollipop though, as part of the overall planning approval, it can be made a provision, right? Because, well, in any case. All right, I just wanted to go back just slightly, a little bit above that, where we're talking about that 20-foot wide do not disturb zone that could be an average of at least 30 feet wide. That's something that we talked about a little bit earlier, and I just wanted to make sure we come back to that. That's still something I think in question by us on the board as well as Mr. Henry. So that's where it is. We want to come back to that too. Okay. Now keep going down, Ned. Some of this was just reorganized. So, but yeah. Right, Ned?
Cheryl, I had a question, because you had a section that said it said it was under driveways and access, and there was language. The main driveway shall be set back not less than X number of feet from a side lot line and not less than X number of feet from a rear lot line, provided that there may be an emergency drive made of pervious surfaces and accessible for emergency vehicles only. Such emergency driveway shall be set back not less than 15 feet from side lot line and visually buffered. I couldn't find that anywhere else in the document.
That was actually language that I had put in when the site plan provided for this emergency access around the building between the building and the Bacardi property line.
Okay, so that was written for this. Okay, so
That's right.
So Denny, what we're trying to do now is define what can go in that open space as a way of handling it, right? So if you say the drive, except for the coming in, can't go into the open space, and you're accomplishing what we're
trying to do here.
At least I raised as an issue, which is, it's one thing to say you're going to have a 50-foot setback. If you use the whole setback to have drainage swales and walkways and drive lanes, because then you don't get the open space. It's not open space to me that way, and it's not a buffer that way. So that's why I wanted to keep it out of the open space. So that provision, I think, can be handled in what we allow in open space.
Okay. All right.
The specific paragraph on rights of way or easements dealt with particular issues on the site over at Randolph Avenue. They don't apply here. That's why it's been stricken.
Okay. All right. So where are we now?
Parking.
Parking.
So residents in a memory care facility don't drive. We talked about the demand being for staffing and for visitors. And this was one per every other dwelling unit, so one per two dwelling units. Again, this is something where analysis has to be provided to the board during the special permit process.
Yeah, and the
So-
only change in this paragraph was just saying that we could adjust the number of parking spaces based upon analysis submitted to the planning board. The rest of that language is already in the existing zoning.
Right. And that was for assisted living where, you know, it's not likely that people living in assisted living are driving, but there might be some. So this will have less drivers than potentially an assisted living.
Okay, I'd like to make a proposal. I suggest that we discuss the sign section because I think we're gonna have a few opinions on that. But then I suggest we set an additional meeting in the future, and maybe it's just a zoning meeting on this one topic, maybe more, in the near future to just kind of walk through the zoning, like and to pick up where we left
what
off.
did-
Number 7.
Can I suggest, Denny, that,
Yeah.
you know, perhaps that there's a sort of a smaller group that through Tim's and Allison's efforts that sort of, you know, kind of bangs through this, and maybe we would get sort of a staff memo on it.
I
And
I
that would
think we
move
as a
things
board,
along better.
well, I think as a board, we need to talk through the zoning. I think we need to talk through all of our issues.
Well, I was thinking that would be a way to sort of refine the issues, that's all.
Can I make one comment?
Mhm.
The rest of the zoning deals with adoption of incorporating provisions from other zoning that enhance the nature of the materials that get submitted and what the standards are for reviewing. I think those are solid. I certainly you might think about tweaking them, but from a site design standards, building design standards, and materials that must be submitted with the application. That's pretty robust, and that's stuff that I know that Cheryl and Kathleen and others have worked on and taken from the experience of the board in other developments, particularly most recently Walcott Woods. And so I think that's solid, and maybe it could be tweaked. But I think the what we've talked about so far are the issues that really need to be litigated. The rest of it, I think, works. And so unless others would disagree with that, I think where you've gotten to tonight frames what needs to be discussed going forward. We'll do our best to accommodate what we can and work on next drafts with whoever the board would like us to do it with.
Okay.
I agree with Ned, Denny, on those provisions that we haven't discussed. You know, I did do most of that edit work based on, as Ned said, a lot from Wolcott, but also some things just that we've learned, at least in my time on the board, of wanting to be very specific about what we want to receive, so we don't get an application that's not as robust as we'd like. And then also having it be a little clear on what our design expectations are. And that's it was split into both building and site because they're not the same. They were lumped together before.
Yeah, and the other thing is that,
Hands raised.
yeah, most of the things that were crossed out were ones that didn't apply to this particular project. They were more for the Randolph. But yeah, I
Okay.
think it's a pretty good list.
Okay, I do think we're gonna need another meeting at least to go. I just feel like given we probably need another hour or two to just get all the way through, get everybody through it. But I do agree it gets easier as we go. I can understand why you would say that because my comments start to narrow.
Denny,
Okay.
can I make a suggestion?
Yes, please.
So the planning board is meeting in a few short days again on Tuesday. It's, as agendas go, it's lighter than usual, but still kind of heavy. You've got a continued public hearing for 440 Granite and consideration of the 193 Central decision. But especially if, so, I mean, it sounds like there's been a little bit of homework that's been kind of assigned, but there's still kind of more zoning to review here. If as Ned attests that, these are sort of solid provisions that are relatively, hopefully, uncontroversial, it might make sense to maybe pick those up on Tuesday and then, use the planning board's next November meeting to kind of tie up loose ends, before the end of the month.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that probably sounds good. So let's plan on that for next Tuesday. But so we have 440 Granite Ave, we have 193 Central. So it could be a late night. And I promised myself I wasn't going to do 3 public hearings in one night again. So, but let's
On 193 Central, aren't we just signing the decision for that?
that should be easy, right? Should be.
Yeah, can I just
But-
add on that?
Yep.
Marion McKettrick sent revised site plan and landscape plan that I reviewed today, and she just wanted to have, because it was addressing my comments, she wanted me to have a take a look before it was sent to the entire board. And so we all will be getting that, so you should see it, but I was satisfied that it met the concerns that I had. So just wanted
Okay,
to
that's good
think
news,
about that.
but
Yeah.
not on our agenda, so we won't go too deep into that. But all right, let's hear from the people who have their hands up, who want to talk on this topic. We only can do 3 minutes each because we're very late for our other topic. And I promised everyone we would keep our meeting to 2 hours. So, okay, so Mr. Irwin, quickly, did you have any last comments for the memory clinic discussion tonight, which will be continued?
Yes, could
Okay.
maybe the planning board just clarify where we stand on accessory buildings?
Yeah, we're going to put limits on the number and we're going to put
Okay.
limits on the size, and we're not going to allow them in the 50-foot buffer.
Okay. All
And
right,
if you have,
I'll just leave it there because I know you're pressed for time.
but if you have thoughts, bring them
Possibly
to
a
the
further
next meeting.
setback. Possibly
What's
further
that?
setbacks. I said, I think we should talk about further setbacks on the accessory unit dwellings.
Further than 50, okay. We can certainly talk about that
And that's
next
part of
time.
the whole conversation on setbacks in general, I think, so.
I say good points, excellent,
And
okay.
and if someone could clarify the difference between a driveway and a road in this instance.
Okay. All right, to be continued next
Okay,
time.
thank you.
Driveway and a road. Thank you, Mr. Irwin.
Thank you.
And Mr. Henry.
I just wanted to say briefly, I agree that most of the design specific sections are in very good shape, what Cheryl put in. I think the tweaks I would suggest were the points I raised earlier about the submissions being ADA compliant and show proper fire access as a requirement of any site plan being submitted. I think those can be tweaked in one of the later sections where you talk about driveways being safe, well lit, et cetera. You can fold it into that section. That's all.
Right. And I think the swept analysis could go in the, what is this, KL? It's somewhere around OP, so it's somewhere in 12, somewhere in 12. Anyway, okay.
If I may, just one more thing on Mr. Henry's point. Besides the ADA and the split path analysis, I think we need to have fair housing addressed as well with the ADA. This is more than 4 units, and it should meet the fair housing rules.
It would anyway, because it gets licensed by the state. So the memory care units, you know, they are licensed, and under the licensure requirements of the state, there are going to be things that are going to be required to be done. That's not particularly a concern that we have to include in the zoning, in my opinion.
Okay, Mr. Henry?
I'm done, sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so
I'll
much.
take my hand down.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us tonight, and I'm sorry I had to rush everybody. But we have another topic tonight that a lot of people are probably here to join us on. So I would like to turn it over to Kathleen if she'd like to take a few minutes to describe.
Going to
describe.
try to figure out how to share screen.
Just unshared, and I'm going to sign off. So
Well, thank you, Mr. Corcoran, and thank
Thank
you all
you.
the citizens who came out tonight
Thank
for the memory clinic.
yeah,
Thank you for your help. Thank you, Kathleen. So this was on our agenda 11 times, but we never got to it because it was always 11 o'clock by the time we wanted to talk about accessory dwelling units. So we've had a jam-packed agenda all summer and fall. But Kathleen has been working on this.
So I have done a PowerPoint presentation, which I hope you can see.
Yes, we can
Yep.
see it.
Okay. So the first question would be, why are we doing this? And I would point out that it's been recommended in the master plan and the housing production plan. It's been endorsed by the Affordable Housing Committee, the Affordable Housing Trust. What we're trying to do with these accessory dwelling units is to increase housing options, you know, which we definitely need in this town, and provide a process to allow younger families to move in. As an example, in my neighborhood, we have one house that has gone through the process at the zoning board to allow for an accessory building, a garage being converted into an apartment for the grandparents. And the main house is getting turned over to a young family and their kids. So the grandparents get to be near the kids, and the kids get assistance with raising the grandchildren. It helps people with disabilities be able to stay in town, because a person could build a unit or in their house or in their backyard for a disabled, otherwise compromised person. And it provides an ability for seniors to sort of age in place. They could move into a smaller unit in the house or in a separate building, and allow them to sort of stay in town, which would be really delightful for lots of us. So when we have a temporary apartment bylaw, which people are familiar with, but it's very cumbersome. It's very limited. You have to go through the zoning board of appeals. It's very complicated, and it doesn't last very long. It's only three years, and it's very, very limited. It's very cumbersome to do. So that's why we are looking at this new accessory dwelling unit bylaw. The last time we took a look at this, we had it was a 2/3 vote, because the accessory dwelling unit law required that kind of change, that kind of a vote for the passage. Under the new housing choice bill signed by the governor earlier this year, the permit process is different. You can do it as of right if it's built within a lawful single-family dwelling. You need a special permit if you are going to do an accessory dwelling unit in a detached accessory structure. So if you're converting a former garage in the backyard as an accessory dwelling unit, that requires a special permit from the ZBA. But if you are doing it within your house and legally, then that just is an application to the building department. You can only have one ADU on any single family lot. The requirements. So as I said, the building commissioner issues a building permit for the internal ADU. So if you're turning the side, some side of the house into a separate apartment, you've figured out how to do that, you are just going to be applying to the building commissioner for a building permit. The Board of Appeals issues a special permit for any detached ADUs. And you have to remember that these units are supposed to be complete, separate housekeeping unit with a kitchen and bath services. And the lot has to be of adequate size and configuration to permit this increased use without any adverse impact on the neighbors. The application has to include a site plan, a floor plan of the existing dwelling, floor plan of the proposed ADU, elevation plans if you're going to be altering the exterior of an existing dwelling. This has been an issue. I served on the zoning board before I joined the planning board, and it's been an issue with the temporary apartments that have come before the zoning board is that people don't bring in the right information or enough information. And so we've included in this draft the requirements that are part of that application. One question is just sort of how these units are defined. As I said, they're one or more rooms designed and occupied as separate living quarters. They have to have their own cooking, eating, sanitation, and sleeping for the exclusive use of a single household. Design. So they have to be, if they're in the existing building, they have to be smaller than the principal unit and somehow separated from it. So it has a separate entrance. It can be connected through a breezeway or something like that, but it's supposed to be a separate unit. And then the internal, if you're doing it within an existing house, it has to be built in such a way that the building retains the appearance of a single family house. So you have to do it some way so that it's not noticeable that you've got this new unit, not particularly noticeable that you've got this new unit. A detached ADU, which is to say in the backyard, must be clearly smaller and obviously subordinate in size to the design of the single family house. We have a parking provision in this that requires one additional off-street parking space in addition to the parking required for the principal dwelling. But that's something we can talk about. There's been a lot of discussion about the fact that parking requirements are sort of like a poison pill that make these things, impossible to do. We've also put in language into the bylaw that says that there'll be screening for the parking in some way, either by landscaping or fencing or something like that. And then underground utilities, dark sky compliant. You have to be using, if you have Title V, you have a septic system, you have to be using the existing septic system. We're not really allowing you to expand that in any way. That doesn't apply to that many places in Milton, but there are houses in Milton that do have septic. It's important to remember. And there's a limitation on the size. Can't be any more than 2 bedrooms, and it can't be any bigger than 900 square feet. And as I said, once again, it's definitely supposed to be smaller, definitely subordinate to the existing building. Restrictions. We do have owner occupancy requirement. You either have to live as the owner in the house or in the detached or in the ADU. And you obviously, as we said before, you can't have more than one on any lot. You can't turn it into condominiums. They can't be held in separate ownership. You can't divide, sell off the ADU as a separate lot. The ADU can't be used as for a boarding or lodging, facility or other commercial uses. And they can't be rented out for any period of time shorter than 6 months. They can't be used as an Airbnb or a short-term rental, similar short-term rental. So there are limitations on what you can do with it. Pre-existing units, we got some comments from Alex Whiteside that I did look at. And so when I drafted this PowerPoint a while ago, I had a provision in my original draft that said that if you had a temporary apartment, they could become a legal ADU. I've changed that in the draft, which you would see. And you can't get a variance. You have to meet the requirements of the existing zoning. So, you're going to have to comply with the existing setbacks, the existing regulations for your zoning district. You can't get a variance for the accessory dwelling unit from the ZBA. It's got to be compliant with existing zoning. Let's see. Termination, they terminate if the building commissioner discovers or somebody reports the fact that nobody's living there that's an owner. And if that's the case, the cease and desist order goes out from the building commissioner and they have to remove that ADU within 90 days. Lastly, last slide, just wanted to point out that there are many towns around us who have adopted it. Lexington, Arlington, Salem, all 15 towns on Cape Cod passed it. 11 of them voted it in the spring of this year. And then, as I said, there's been this concern that there would be thousands of these units created under this bylaw. The fact of the matter is that the studies show that it's like 2 to 2.5 to 5 units. They're not cheap. I mean, people think, oh, there'd be thousands of them, but I don't know that many people who have an extra 100 grand to spend on a building an accessory unit. And I would also point out that up until World War II, studies have indicated there were accessory dwelling units all over the place. And if you think about the housing in Milton, the older houses, they had accessory dwelling units all the time, but they didn't call them that. They were called servants' quarters. So they had people living on the 3rd floor of their houses. They had people living above the garage. They had people living in the stables, above the stables. I mean, that was a standard operating procedure 100 years ago. People like with my name would have been, doing the floors and living on the 3rd floor. And as an example, I would point out that my house here was built in 1890. And the rumor is that it was built by a single woman who lived here with her maid. And the maid lived on my 3rd floor without a kitchen and without a bathroom. So as I said, these are sort of a model that has been around for a long time. And it wasn't until probably, as I said, after the Second World War, where you tend to lose them as part of the fabric of a town. But as I said, there are many towns in Massachusetts are adopting these. They are really a way to sort of address a diversity of housing, to provide seniors a way to age in place, and to provide opportunities for families to. One of the examples is a couple that are divorced and are now going to be co-parenting. This is a way to address that situation. So it's useful in a lot of ways, and we should be doing something. This is something that has been proposed in this town for, I saw a draft accessory dwelling unit bylaw that must be 20 years old that was proposed. So it's something that's been talked about. It's in our master plan, as I said, and it's something that I think that we really need to address in terms of housing diversity. And that's my
Thank you.
presentation.
Excellent, thank you. I see Rich Beeler has his hand up. Hi, Rich.
Yes, just a quick question. And you don't have to bring it back up, but on your slide, a few slides back, there was parking. Can you, and I can't remember what it said, but you had mentioned something about putting up screening for the cars. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Is that what you meant? Like, so it's not like, I'm trying to think of my house, right? So I've got a long driveway. I could probably fit 5 cars in there.
Yeah.
If I had an accessory dwelling in my house, would that person just park in my driveway, or are we saying that there would have to be a separate driveway with screening around it?
No, it doesn't have to be separate. It just has to, you have to provide a parking space.
Okay, good. Okay. I just didn't, I got
yeah.
concerned about the screening. Like, would somebody have to like build?
No, I mean, as I said, that's if you were constructing new parking.
Okay, good.
I mean, lots of times, people, as you know, I mean, my driveway is only 1 car wide,
Yeah, mine too.
To do the little dance, when there were more people living here.
Right. Right.
I don't know how the family of 5 kids handled that when they lived here, but Currys apparently all survived. But yeah, so it would only be if you were constructing new parking.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, great. Well, if it's okay, I think we could open it up to the public. So please, if you are interested in asking questions, offering comments, feedback, sharing thoughts, please raise your hand. I see Hale and Tucker Smith have a hand raised. Would you be able to join us, Hale and/or Tucker Smith?
Hi, good evening. This is Tucker Smith speaking.
Good evening. What's your address, Tucker?
All right, 1632 Canton Avenue in Milton since 1979.
Thank you.
Um,
Oh, I have to do a 23B3 disclosure because I was on the garden club with Tucker Smith, so carry
All
on.
right. All right, thank you. Well, I have, sort of a different take on this, and I'll just sort of read a quick statement. I am opposed to this or any bylaw having to do with future construction in the town of Milton until a comprehensive municipal climate action plan is created. This will put the town into compliance with legislation, which was signed by Governor Baker last March. And it was called an act creating a next generation roadmap for Massachusetts climate policy. And contained within this law are timelines and requirements that municipalities must follow if the Commonwealth is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions caused by burning fossil fuels. And most of certainly our older housing stocks do this, by using oil or natural gas. I live next door to Walcott Woods, which is a project that was long discussed by this board and is under construction now. It contains 54 single family or duplex units, not one of which, to my knowledge, features solar or heat pump technology, and all of it is fueled by propane. So the town of Milton is experiencing development pressure to increase its affordable housing and the variety of housing for citizens in different ages and stages of life. I agree that these are both, important and much needed. However, Milton is also under climate change pressure, and it will have to align itself with state legislation to decarbonize. So until then, I think a discussion of this nature is premature. So with that said, I've been a longtime member of many conservation and environmental groups, and including Sustainable Milton. So this is a concern, and it will concern the planning board at some point. So thank you.
Thank you, Tucker Smith. And yeah, I think you raised some excellent points that I hadn't thought of in relation to this bill, but we do have a lot of issues that we are trying to balance here. Very good points. Thank you for bringing them to our attention.
Jenny,
know. Yes.
Can I chime in for just a sec here?
Yes, please do.
And Tucker, we can chat about this offline. I'm actually not aware of, and this is not to say that they don't exist. I'm kind of plugged into this bill, but not super plugged into it. I'm not aware of any municipal requirements that are placed on municipalities by the climate change legislation that was signed earlier this year. I know that DOER is going to be putting out guidance towards a opt-in net zero stretch code, which municipalities will be able to opt into. Milton is a stretch code community. And if and when that guidance comes out, I will be the first in line to encourage the town to adopt the net zero stretch code. That'll apply to new construction and new renovations. I'm not really aware of anything else that would require a change in policy on the part of municipalities. I think a lot of it is on the business sector and in kind of state regulations. But so I'd be very interested to hear where you're coming from on that. But the other thing that I want to kind of stress for the board is that regardless of having a formal climate action plan or not, and I've chatted on a few occasions with Tucker about pursuing that strategy, and I think we should pursue a climate action plan, because I think it's just a good idea generally. But I'm not even going to say one of the most impactful thing that a municipality, any municipality, anywhere in the world can do to, on its own, affect greenhouse gas emissions is to intensify land use, especially close to transit, especially close to the urban core. So, when we talk about, development, it's the difference between if you can't live in Boston and you can't live in Milton and you can't live in Randolph and you can't live in Avon because there's no housing being built. That is a contributor to greenhouse gas in a huge way. Transportation is the #1 contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And a significant chunk of that is personal vehicles. So I don't want to pile on too much, but I think the idea of a development moratorium is really the wrong approach, because I think, town of Milton, because of its proximity to the city of Boston, really does need to be thinking about how can we responsibly, but actively pursue new housing opportunities that bring people closer to the urban core, where all of the jobs and amenities and resources for the region are. So, we're talking about accessory dwelling units. We're talking about a handful of units, but the principle of using existing patterns of development, in a small scale, rather than, chopping up new pieces of land for subdivisions, I think it should be a very attractive, principle for the planning board, especially as it relates to greenhouse gas emissions, impervious surface, climate change impacts. So we can continue to talk about this, and we will continue to talk about it because it's the number one thing facing humanity, obviously.
Well, and I going on to Tim's point is that I think we have, our planning board rules and regulations haven't been updated in like 20 years. Our subdivision rules and regulations, our zoning code's kind of a mess in terms of trying to figure out what section is where. So I think we have a wonderful opportunity, hopefully, in the next few months to sort of address climate change issues and incorporate those into our rules and regulations as we go forward. But I don't think that accessory dwelling units, which are essentially, for the most part, reusing in an efficient way excess space in people's houses, is not something that isn't climate friendly, as Tim has mentioned.
This is Rich. I just to make one quick comment here. Yeah, Tim, if you start having more and more conversations about it, I'd love to be part of this. I peeked right up when I heard that comment being made. I'm glad, Hale, that you brought that up. It's near and dear to my heart. I spend a lot of time in that industry. I work for a mission-driven company. This is what I do all day long, and I'm investing a lot of time into it. So I would love to be part of those conversations. But I do agree with Tim and Kathleen. I do like where we're going with this zoning, but I'm a huge fan of continuing that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's one of those topics that I think we should almost bring up and think about in almost every zoning article. So thank you so much, Tucker Smith, for bringing that to our attention.
Sorry, Tucker.
No,
I was
that's
looking
okay.
at the first name.
It was up as Tucker and Hale.
It's getting late. I'm getting tired.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so onward here. Mr. Whiteside, good evening.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's nice to see you, Mr. Whiteside.
Well, it's a great pleasure to see the members of the board hard at work. And this is a complicated one. We have an article. We have a bylaw provision called detached one-family dwelling with temporary apartment in section 3, subsection A, paragraph 9. And the master plan indeed said this is a clunky provision and it needs to be amended. And I don't disagree with that. I think that it should be amended, but I think that where the amendment is a brand new article, that's really not what the master plan had in mind. They had in mind taking what we've got and making some amendments and making it better. The planning board has, or what we're discussing tonight is an accessory dwelling units article, which would give 7,000 homeowners the right to add an apartment to their property. There's 7,000 homeowners, and an estimate has been made by the Pioneer Institute that in other towns with accessory apartment bylaws, because of the restrictions, there are only a handful of houses that can provide them. And the average is 2.5 units a year. And if we are talking about a bylaw provision to produce 2.5 units a year, then it seems to me we're just wasting our time. I think that everyone knows that there are going to be significantly more than 2.5 units, but no one knows how much because no one has studied it. And the last time this was brought up, there was a suggestion that the Pioneer Institute's computation of 2.5 units a year based on a variety of different bylaws 5 years ago needs to be updated. And we need to have a really solid idea of how many units we're talking about. If we're just talking about 3 units a year, we shouldn't be talking. Now, I have provided the board with a memo which is 8 pages long, which has a number of general comments and then 27 specific comments about the bylaw. I'm limited to 3 minutes, and I don't see that I can address those general comments and the 27 specific comments, but I believe that you've been provided a copy of the memo. And in fact, Ms. O'Donnell indicates that she has seen my comments, although I can't say that she has caved to most of them. But in any event, it's there. But one of my big concerns is that this article takes the permitting process away from the Board of Appeals and gives it to the building inspector, who is supposed to make the same determinations as the Board of Appeals, but he gets to do it without giving any notice whatsoever to any of the neighbors, and he doesn't have to have a hearing. He just has to determine these things. And it seems to me that this is just the wrong way of going at the matter. It really needs to be, it can't be just the building inspector sitting in his office saying, I think I'll do this, I think I'll do that. I think I'll make these findings, I think I won't make these findings. It's not a good process. So I wrote a memo to the building inspector saying that I think that you're getting in way over your head if you determine to be the permit granting authority on apartments, accessory apartments, and single family houses. So I sent that to him and I got a response, and I'm going to read his response. He says, "Hi, Alex. I have not seen the latest proposal from the PB. I would certainly share your concern about any provision that makes the building commissioner, it won't always be me, the determining party on issues of design, screening, privacy, etc. It seems to me that much of this could be made prescriptive. I will say that there is a fair amount of time already spent on reviewing proposals prior to parties applying to the ZBA and subsequent monitoring of any decisions rendered by the ZBA or PBA or PB for that matter. So from my perspective, there may be an opportunity to streamline and reduce the burden on resources with a properly worded bylaw. I will also add that the current bylaw has some loopholes which folks currently take advantage of, along with some ambiguities that make enforcement difficult. Over the past year or so, 3 or 4 persons have expressed interest in this, but I have explained to them that this bylaw is not yet the law of the land, that ADUs are not yet allowable. I agree with Mike that there will likely not be an onslaught of applicants. It is my hope that the PB will share a draft proposal with my office prior to recommending it for inclusion in the warrant. I am curious to see what steps the PB takes next. Perhaps once this moves a little further along, you and I and others could meet to discuss. I think that the building commissioner is right, that this should be a process. Doing this bylaw, and this meeting is great. A great start on formulating what should be in the bylaw and how it should address the issue of permitting, as well as the issue of inspections and or enforcement. But inspections, I think, should be necessary because these homeowners are not professional landlords, and some of them are not going to get it right. There has to be good enforcement provisions in this so that the town doesn't get stuck with a lot of problems, which it would. Good enforcement makes for a good program. So I think I've taken up my 3 minutes saying what I've said, but I have more to say, and I'd be happy to say it, but I will leave that to the board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Whiteside. If we have a little time at the end, I would ask you back or perhaps at a future meeting. But at this point, I would love to welcome any other citizens who have any thoughts or comments about this bylaw, this article, I'm sorry, the accessory dwelling unit article. Let's see. Mr. Irwin, did you want to speak again? Or is your hand up from the last topic? Okay. Tim Cherwinski, did you want to speak? Your hand is up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to just make sure the board was aware. I did share the draft with Joe Prondak, the building commissioner. I wanted to get a little bit of a flavor of what the planning board was thinking on this before he and I sat down. I'm going to schedule a meeting with him next week to kind of chat through this. Alex obviously, read Joe's email. I was, I think, CC'd on that as well. So, there's nothing in there that I disagree with. I think that, the fundamental question I think about this bylaw, and I think my personal and professional opinion is that it's worth bringing to town meeting because there is a fundamental question at work of, do we want to have a kind of a by right regime of ADU construction or not? And what's kind of inherent in a by right scheme is, as Alex and Joe Prondak say, is prescriptive requirements and clear instructions and feasible enforcement procedures that the building commissioner can use. And some of that is not necessarily consistent with what we would see in a special permit, for instance, with a lot of design guidelines and a lot of judgment calls about screening or materials or site planning. It's when you're in a by right situation, the building commissioner is a by the book, by the numbers kind of position. That's the nature of that position. And so it's a question for the board, and if the board answers yes, then it becomes a question for town meeting: is are we comfortable with putting something into zoning that people can then kind of go off and use? And so I think I also sent along Alex's memo, and I think I sent along his email that he sent to Joe and to the town administrator. In typical Alex fashion, it was a very well thought out and really deliberate set of arguments. I think there's a lot of stuff to chew on. I think between now and the next time, the board meets, I think, taking a lot of those comments to heart would probably make for a, a good bylaw. But I think, it really is important to keep in front of mind that, and I think Alex kind of, teased this out a little bit, when you've got a bunch of restrictions and a special permit process and, you've got to go through all sorts of different boards, that's when you get into a situation where you're getting, one or two or three of these things a year. If we do think that accessory dwelling units are a, small but important part of our housing future, we need to think about how we actually make it, I don't want to necessarily say easy because I don't think that it would be great if we had 1,000 ADU applications in a year, but I don't think we would in any case. But you want to make it so that it's a feasible thing to do so that regular folks can do it. Because at the end of the day, what makes an ADU attractive as a housing type is it's not, brand new luxury construction in, a penthouse apartment. It's a small unit in someone's house. You're probably going to be related, to your landlord in a lot of those cases. And so there's a natural kind of affordability and a natural kind of creation of a separate kind of almost non-existent housing type in town of Milton. So you do want to make it so that an okay number of these things actually get built. And so these are weighty questions for the board, and they're important ones. And I think Alex raises a lot of good points, but we've got to wrestle with those.
Mr. Beeler, Rich, did you have a point?
Yes, just a question. I don't know. I can't remember if we've talked about this a while back or Kathleen. I want to say you had some comments on it before because we've talked about this for a while. But the idea, like, because I agree, right? Sounds a little scary if there is a potential for lots of these things to come through, and I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. But the reality is, there's a lot of towns that have this, and so there's data. So we don't have to guess. We should be able to just look at lots of towns that have had these, bylaws in existence over the years and what they're seeing. I mean, I'm a big fan of data. So I swear we have looked at that or talked about it at one point, but I mean, that's my suggestion is we should just look at that.
I mean, it's a good point. And I know, I'm convinced that we would not be getting thousands of applications. But as I did mention, I think before to Chair Swenson, when we first started, we talked about this a bit, is that I'm not opposed to the idea of putting in a cap of how many can be done in a year. If we said you could do 15 in a year, I don't think that's, I would live with that kind of limitation, and that would address the concern expressed by Mr. Whiteside that, everybody in town is going to be spending $100,000 on an accessory apartment. And that would address the concerns of the building department, thinking that they had too many of these things to look at. So I have some language. I looked at Alex's memo and I made some changes to the draft. I sent it to Tim this afternoon, but it was not ready for primetime view. But I did incorporate some of his suggestions, and I will send those to Mr. Whiteside, or Tim can. And we can discuss putting in a cap about how many of them are done. And I think 15 or whatever a year would be a reasonable cap. I don't think we'd ever come close to that, but that addresses the concerns that have been raised about these units.
Thank you. So Ms. Tagayas, and then we will welcome Alex back, and then if there's anyone else from the public, and then I'll just read 2 letters that came in, and then we'll wrap up this discussion for now. Because we promised we'd keep it to 9 o'clock, so we're a little bit over. But let's hear from Cheryl.
Thanks, Denny. I just want to point out that Kathleen and I both, and I think Rich too, actually, we all worked on the housing production plan that was adopted by the select board and the planning board last year. And one of the recommendations as one of the first priorities in year one is to amend our accessory apartment bylaw. And what that actually says is can be found in the housing production plan on page 83, if everyone would like to take a look at that. The other thing I'd like to point out in terms of smart growth and smart energy, if you go to mass.gov, there's a smart growth, smart energy toolkit, and it addresses accessory dwelling units. And one of the things that it says is identifying the problem is it says that the census shows that the average number of people per household has decreased significantly over the last 30 years from 3.1 in 1970 to 2.6 in 2002. Yet new homes continue to be built, suggesting that there is increased capacity in the housing stock. And what it's saying is that the resulting tax burden continues to rise, and homeowners are often forced to sell a house that is too big for their needs, especially for a fixed income resident. And this further aggravates an already existing scarcity of affordable housing options and land consumption and new infrastructure required to continue to build standard single-family subdivisions. So this is some good reading, I think, for board members and for members of the public who like Tim, are drawing a correlation between where we build our housing and what it means for climate change and infrastructure and building further into greenfields. And so there's a lot of data on this. This is not, as Rich said, you're looking for data. There's a ton of data. ARP has a ton of data on ADUs. And it's something that I think we should move forward with. We should address some concerns and comments, and we should look at some of that data. And I just would like to point something out in terms of one of the comments about design. You know, I'm an architect, right? And I've been an architect for a long time. We have no provisions in anything in our requirements in Milton on the design of a single family home, or on the design of an addition to a single family home, or changes to a single family home. And the building inspector reviews every one of those permit applications and makes judgments on those plans, no matter who they're prepared by. Those plans don't have to be prepared by a licensed architect. They can be prepared by the contractor. And so if we're concerned about design and we make it too onerous on the ADU, what are we saying about the rest of our design standards for our single families and those additions? So I think it's a big topic. And one of the things about making something prescriptive is we have a whole different variety of housing stock here, all different styles, in addition, how the sizes of these homes, the property that they're on, how big the land is, what the topography is. And to make something prescriptive that addresses that variety, I think would be very difficult. So those are my comments tonight. I'd like to have, I'll have more comments when we talk about this again.
Okay. Meredith, did you have any thoughts or comments?
Yes, I do. Because I think the goals of this and diversity of housing is something that we all care greatly about. But when I look at this potential bylaw, when the building commissioner this would allow the building commissioner to be the permitting authority. No public notice or hearing would be required, so an ADU can be added by right by any homeowner. There would be no special permit. All that would be required is that a building permit be issued as long as it complies with zoning. Any single family that would become an ADU automatically becomes a two-family. And I think we need to be able to be prepared to talk to town meeting about what the implications would be of this to the impact to the town. Increasing the number of housing units would be market units working against our 10% affordable goal. No restriction, there would be no restriction on rent. So it's not necessarily, these would not necessarily be inexpensive units. These are market rate units. A permit by a pre-existing non-conforming detached structure also would have to have setback requirements clearly. We currently have a number of 40B applications in front of us, and we will ultimately have a large number of rental units, 25% of which will be actually affordable. I guess we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of trying to add additional rental units when we have so many currently in the pipeline? Unless our goal is simply to increase the housing production, whatever the consequences, with all other units
Town meeting.
we have currently online. I think we need to be able to address town meeting and answer the questions of how many households would ultimately be able to build an ADU and what would be the impact to the town. Any study we have or have done should be posted online. I know right now the answer is ultimately all households would be able to apply for this permit. Any new zoning, I think, would need to account for preserving open space, especially in already dense areas of Milton. I do question how the building commissioner will be able to be responsible for enforcement of ownership and occupancy. This creates, I think, potential problems for our town, not only just our building commissioner, but this could also, if there were issues of enforcement, involve our town in litigation. Right now, we have no enforcement language at all in this provision. I also would want to know what the process would be when a resident sells an ADU. Is there confirmation of title? Would we have to go through the title process, checking the title that it's the new owner? Would it be owner occupied? I think that creates a whole other issue. And it was also recommended that we update our temporary apartment bylaw, which I actually would love for us to balance and consider this as well, because I think it is cumbersome right now, but I think there are some real, there are ways that we can work with our current temporary apartment bylaw without adding market rate units and counting against our affordability. Our challenge is that I believe, is that we will have an ongoing battle to stay ahead of our 10% affordable housing. Even if we only add 15%, 15 units a year, that's 1.5. And I think we're fighting right now for every affordable unit we can get in our town. And if we start creating additional ways for market rate units, in addition to the current construction that we already have, I think it's going to be making our battle even harder. With improving our current temporary apartment bylaw, we will not be increasing the market rate units. I love what Tucker added about a roadmap for climate policy as we look at the development in our town. As I said, diversity of housing is incredibly important, I know, to everyone on our board. But I think what we need to also present, because I do hear that a lot, that people for 40 Granite in all different areas of applications for development projects are talking about diversity of housing. And I think it's really important that our planning department, and I would love this if we could even have it for our next meeting, a report on 3 categories. The number of apartments and condominiums, 1, currently under construction, 2, how many projects have already been approved that are not yet under construction, that are coming online, because we already have a large number of market rate units, condominiums and apartments, and how many units do we have in the application process of the current 40Bs that could potentially be in the pipeline. I think we have never created so much diversity of housing as what we are creating right now with apartments and condominiums in the history of Milton. We have a huge number of units coming online. And I think we just have to be prepared to look at what our town resources are and in light of all of this development before we start to really aggressively try to add additional development of units. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would like
Excellent.
to just address that a little bit. Meredith, thank you very much for your comments. Is that the accessory dwelling units address a different category of resident than you address with the 10% affordable housing, 80% of area median income. We have people that have 100% of area median income that can't find places to live. There are, as you know, as you've said, many units coming online, but these accessory dwelling units are really a way to address a family situation, not a market situation. And I don't think we can crucify accessory dwelling units on this 10%. I mean, 10% of affordable housing is important. I've been doing affordable housing, for over 25 years. So I know, what you're speaking about, and I appreciate that. But the accessory dwelling units are really designed to address the middle, the gap between affordable and the market, and to provide a different housing stock. And basically you could have your caretaker there, you could have your grandparents, you could have your kids. It's really that sort of thing. And it's a different situation than the commercial stuff that we're facing with this 40Bs. But you make a good point. But as I said, we spent 30 years not doing any affordable housing, and we're unfortunately paying the price for that. And I don't think accessory dwelling units should be crucified on that issue. Thank you.
Well, and I would love to see ADU units that are affordable. And I know currently you're working with the town of Dover, I believe, and doing ADUs that would count as affordable, which
I did them, not Dover. I did them in Lincoln, and I've done
Lincoln.
them with, we had to get special legislation for it. We've done them in Lincoln, and we did them in Situate. We've done them in other places, but we can't require people to do that. They have to ask. Carlisle, we have a program as well.
I think that would be great to look at, but I think we can still achieve what our goal is with a temporary apartment bylaw that's improved without adding, which would not add on market rate, technically market rate units.
The temporary would do the same situation. And why would we took a look at the temporary one that's what we did at the last town meeting, was a comparison, trying to work with it and trying to fix it and all that sort of stuff. And it's just a mess.
Well, maybe we can revisit that.
I'll look at it again. I'm, perfectly happy to do that.
Thank you. That's good.
Thank you. Yeah, I am also interested. I thought Meredith made a lot of really important points. I think I echo a lot of her points. And I think I very much appreciate the concept of a limit of 10 to 15 units a year. I think that if there was some limitations in there, it could help a great deal. But even still, I think if we could come up with some more language to limit the enforcement concerns, the idea that it could pop up in a neighborhood and a neighborhood would never even be able to talk about any potential concerns that they would have that would be specific to their neighborhood. For instance, in Milton Hill, you have historic preservation, or, various, East Milton, you have parking. Every neighborhood has its issue, right? Many issues, actually. So I just think some more limitations in there could help steer it in a positive, and the public hearing is a great way of getting to that. I also looked at the language in the master plan, and I looked at the housing production plan, and they were asking for amendment to the apartment bylaw. So I would love to visit that topic. So let's see, we have a full house, but it seems that nobody's raising their hand except we have Tim and Kathleen. But if it's okay, I'd love to read these 2 letters that came in quickly.
Have those been shared with us? I don't remember seeing any emails with any letters.
Oh, I believe they have been. I'm sorry, I thought they were shared through Tim, Rick Neely, and Mary Beckman.
No, I'd rather, Denny, if you would send them to the board first before you read them to the public.
Okay.
I have no idea what they say.
It's okay. I mean, Rick Neely has been actively reaching out to all of us about this topic.
He
for
hasn't
over a
reached
year.
out to me at all.
Not me.
No,
No,
I'm not.
this
Not
is-
at this round. On the last round, he was very active. I'm
I'd just like
surprised.
to make sure anytime that any of
Yeah.
us get a communication.
I'm sorry. I
from the
thought that they
public
had
it be
gotten
shared, yeah.
routed
Okay.
through, but I'm not. Okay. All right. We will read them at the next meeting, and they will get routed in between. That's fine. Okay. Is there anyone else? Oh, we have Kevin's iPad, who has his hand raised. Kevin, would you like to join us?
Sure.
Oh, Kevin, could you give us your name and street address?
Kevin Keating, I'm at 28 Harlan Street, Precinct 5, Town Meeting Member. It would have been nice to have heard what Rick Neely had to say on this topic, because I know he has been vocal in his concerns about this, as have I. I think that there's some serious questions that I have, and both you and Meredith spoke about them. I mean, an ADU starts, okay. Who can live in an ADU? I know what Kathleen is saying, that this is a gap between like a family member or what have you. I didn't see that it said that it was specific to that. So perhaps I missed it. But the other thing that Meredith had to say was that, does it go away when the house sells and that type of thing? I think these are really major concerns. As you know, I'm a realtor in town, and this would be very concerning for me in selling properties in town if people had ADUs up and down the street. And I don't know what the impact would be. I don't think there's any limit as to being able to rent these units and rent them to people who had children, and what the impact to the school system would be as well. I just think that there's a lot of work to do here, and I'm really concerned about it. And I know that you're over your time limit now, but certainly something that I'm going to pay attention to. And I know there are other people in town that will as well, but I'd be very careful on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. Thank you. So let's see. Tim, did you want to talk? I noticed your hand is raised, but I'm not sure if you meant it the last time.
Yeah. Oh, Denny, I always mean it.
Okay.
So I just sent along Ms. Beckman's letter. Denny, that was addressed to you and me. I apologize, that slipped through the cracks on my end, but maybe we can address that on Tuesday after everyone's had a chance to read it. But if you do have a letter from Rick Neely that you want to send to me that I can send along to the rest, I don't have anything in my inbox from him.
Okay, sorry, I had assumed it had gone to everyone, but that's just me.
The other thing that I wanted to just mention, and this is not, I don't want to go after anyone in particular, but I just want the planning board to kind of think about kind of the implications of a conversation about adding market rate units versus losing ground on our 40B kind of count. There is no affordability obligation for a subdivision, 227 Pleasant Street, Jill Kathleen Way, any of a number of subdivisions that have been approved over the years. And those are just houses. Those are market rate units that get added. Most of the units that we add in this town are market rate units that don't have a commensurate increase in our affordable, unit count. And, it's a function of subdivision control law. It's a subdivision of the fact that we don't allow multifamily in a lot of places, and we can't do inclusionary zoning. But it's the solution to catching up to our 40B obligations is to build affordable housing. And it's period. I mean, that's all it is. The other thing that I'll mention is, the planning board last week added a new market rate unit to School Street via A&R. It happened at the end of the meeting. It took 2 minutes, which is not to say that the planning board shouldn't have done it. It's a fine thing to have done, and you're obligated to approve an A&R if it meets the requirements. But I just want to kind of demonstrate how how easy it is to just add market rate units without even thinking about the fact that now, however minuscule it is, the count on 40B is now a little bit off. So I would actually relish the opportunity to think a little bit more critically about what our subdivision regulations say, for instance, or what our cluster bylaw says, which that is a thing that has a real opportunity to kind of move the needle on land use, I mean physical land use in town, if we can sort of get that a little bit more right. And I would kind of focus on the creation of affordable housing if we're concerned about affordable housing, but also keep our eye on the ball of, there are all sorts of other different housing types that are necessary to build in town of Milton.
Okay, well, on that note, and point taken, I think it's also just a matter of trying to plan. So I think if we're talking about 10 units a year, it's different than an unknown number or an unlimited number. So it's just different.
Oh,
So,
and Denny, one more thing real quick, just while,
Yeah.
Meredith, I didn't have my notebook out. Can we chat offline tomorrow, or maybe just shoot me an email? Happy to put together a report on pipeline units, and just specifically what you need to know. I didn't have a pen in my hand.
I think that would be great, but I think it would be great to let the community know, because we keep, everyone's saying we need more diversity of housing, which we all agree on. But I don't think people are looking at it in what is going to be the development that's under construction right now, the number of units, the apartments and condos that we currently have to absorb, and what is in the pipeline for what is coming down, because we're going to be seeing a lot of diversity of housing, more than we ever have before. And I think it's finding the balance of how much we can handle as a town and our resources.
Absolutely. I'm not saying I'm going to email you the results. I'm going to put the results up on the website.
Thank you.
To everybody. I just what like specific stats you're looking for. You can just shoot me an email. That would be good.
Okay, great.
I just would like to point out that there's a real, there's a whole lot of data in the housing production plan. It has some pipeline as of the date of its publication. But I think you'll also find in there, and I can't find the number right just quickly on my fingertips, but the vast majority of the housing stock in Milton is single family homes. So even adding what's being added with the 40B developments is not going to change that percentage in a radical way. And as to the need, there's a real articulate, there's a lot of data again about the need. And I think it's really useful, whoever's interested in this topic, to really get into the detail in the housing production plan. It's really data rich. And it's really, when it was put together and I was part of the group reviewing it, it's pretty startling when you look at how some people, a large number of people, more than you would think, are really strapped because of the cost of housing. And it really does limit who can live in town. And I talk to a lot of people who have children who are my children's age, just graduating from college. And where are they going to live? They can't live in the places that they grew up in. It's too expensive for them. And, we have to begin to think about that. What does that mean for our community? So I really think there's a lot of information in that really should be understood by all who really want to think about our housing needs in Milton.
And I think having this count will actually help us update the housing production plan too, and say what we've actually been producing, so which we need to keep up on.
Okay, excellent. All right, Mr. Keating, did you want to speak one more time? You're currently muted. I'm not sure if you wanted to speak or if you were all done for the night, Mr. Keating. Okay, I think Kevin might be done for the night. Okay, Mr. Beeler.
Yeah, I know we're wrapping up, so I won't take but a second.
Okay.
I like the idea of looking at data, especially looking at some data. I mean, I'll go and look too on folks or towns that have these laws in place and what they're seeing. I can't imagine that towns would continue to put these bylaws in place if all of a sudden there was hundreds and thousands of ADUs coming around in their towns, because everybody would be panicked, I'd imagine. The only thing I would, and I agree with Meredith, your comments, the only thing I would push back a little on is, some of those like apartments that are coming in are these large developments, right? We got really large developers coming in and building apartment complexes. And what we're looking at here is, and I am certainly not looking to build an ADU, but this is like me, residential homeowner, wanting to build an ADU for maybe my mother or my kids or something. I don't want to have to go to one of those big complexes that are coming in and spend all that money to put my child in or my mother in. If I've got the facility in my house or the type of house that I could, put that in pretty easily, I want to be able to do it. I want to be able to do it pretty easily in this town, and I think I should have the right to do it. But I do agree with all the comments on the restrictions. I do think we should button it up. I do think we should put everything we can in place to make sure that this doesn't get out of control. But I really hope we can get to a point where we kind of agree and put it to the town, let them vote on it. Because I know we've been talking about this for a long time.
And there was, I just wanted to comment, and I know we need to wrap up. This past week, I was watching the Board of Appeals, and there was an application for an addition, a property that was putting addition on the property and wanted to put a temporary apartment within it. That went through beautifully. It was what was meant to be. It was the process. There were neighbors involved, and it was approved. And it was maybe in 15 minutes that it went through. It was not a complicated process. It went through the zoning board of appeals. We could have made it easier by saying that somebody could put an addition on and do a temporary apartment at the same time. And it would achieve everything that we're all talking about without creating a new bylaw. That's all I have to say.
Okay, excellent points. Okay, we went a little bit over, but we had a great discussion. I feel that I think there was consensus on looking for ways to set healthy limits. So to be continued. I think at our next meeting, we might want to consider scheduling an additional meeting this month to see, to flesh out the memory clinic discussion. Because even if we tack it on to the end of our next meeting, we still might need time. So just wanted to give you a heads up, but we'll talk about that next week, but probably the week of the 16th. We currently don't have a meeting that week. So, so let's think about that. Okay. But
yeah, Denny, just really quick. I'm going to put a zoning item on the agenda for next Tuesday. I haven't posted the agenda yet.
okay.
But I think, based on what we're all hearing tonight, it'll be, because it's only in a couple days, it'll be relatively limited, but I do think it's important for the board to kind of, continue to take the opportunity to make whatever progress they can when they can. But, it will be at the end of the meeting and it will be kind of a little bit more limited because there hasn't really been much time for,
okay.
between meeting.
And to keep the focus going, ideally, it would be great if we all pick up where we left off on the memory clinic. We were at like number 8 or something. If we just try to keep a focus and just keep plotting.
I just
that
make
would
a
be-
request that we get some calendar invites for the next couple of meetings.
Second that. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
I love
Yeah,
when we
Alright.
get those.
we'll make sure that gets done.
Thank
Okay, I
you.
know it's a lot coming at us. So, all right.
I'm just
right,
so
well,
ingrained with the Thursdays that I kind of,
Yeah. Same here.
anyway.
And I think if we're going to be having more meetings, I think we really have to try to keep them shorter. Like this ending at 9:30, I think is much better than 11:30.
Yeah,
So
what are we
try
going
to
to do
keep,
it ourselves?
we're going to try to keep the amount of things on each agenda small and wrap up by 9:30. That's our goal. Okay.
Awesome.
Sound good? Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Kathleen. Thank you.
I just want to
Cheryl.
mention that
Yeah.
this, the AARP has on their website a whole discussion about ADUs, which people might find helpful. That's aarp.org/ADU, that you can read more about them and read about the efforts and that sort of thing. It's a very useful link.
All right, I'll send the link to the state, the mass.gov that I referenced, but also I think MAPC has data as well on the ADUs. And I
Yeah.
think mass.gov, the state has a model bylaw. So, and it has case studies. So I think there's a lot of information out there. So hopefully everybody can share what they learn at our next meeting.
Okay, I'll take a motion. I'll
Motion to-
entertain a motion. Is that Rich?
Yes.
Okay. Any second? Okay. All in favor? Shots,
Yes.
guys. Meredith Hall.
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell.
Yes.
Rich Beeler. Denny
Yes.
Swinton. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.
Good night.
You know.